You're now listening to the Diversity Roundtable. I'm Pamela Xaba, entrepreneur, inclusion enthusiast, and the founder of Nonkosi Creatives with over 2 decades as a corporate HR professional. My goal is to give you insights into conversations with entrepreneurs and corporate professionals who have insightful stories of triumph and leadership. I uncover my personal journey from cultivating diversity and promoting inclusive communities. We'll also find out why building a prosperous society is vital for leadership roles. Subscribe and get ready to rise, lead, and help define the spirit of South African excellence. Good day. Thank you for coming in. Thank you for tuning in. I am your host, Pamela Xaba, for the Diversity Roundtable. We are on episode 17 today. But before we get into the nitty-gritties and introducing our guest for today's episode, let us just recap. We've just come from August. In South Africa, this was Women's Month, and we recorded 2 parts of our The Ability to Be Women's Month series with 4 remarkable ladies where they're talking about their journeys of joys, of wins, and triumphs. But now we have just started September, and it's also another beautiful month in our country. In the sunny South Africa, we've started our spring. Spring is out, it's warm, people are out, they're looking lovely, but it's also our Heritage Month, right? So where we celebrate our culture, who we are as a people, our identity, and all things wonderful and all of the things that make us South African. But then, right, we are then still talking about diversity and who we are as people. So today, on episode 17, we have an inspiring lady with us, a really remarkable leader in business, but also a leader in the HR field, who has done amazing work both in public service as well as corporate leadership. Elsie Pule, welcome to the Diversity Roundtable episode 17. And we have crafted a very special topic for you today because you are known to actually then, come up with really impactful women leadership programs, right? And we know very much that you are passionate about women and women development, right? But today, the topic, we would like to look at, your lens in terms of diversity and inclusion beyond the women agenda. What are your thoughts? And we'll cover some common themes. We'll cover some themes around your background as well, your thoughts around diversity and inclusion in general and beyond, and how does the future look like for you? But before we get there, right, so I think let's allow you to introduce yourself. Who is Elsie Pule, for those that don't know, which I doubt very much anyway. That, a lot of people don't know who you are, but, maybe do you want to share some aspects that you think will be beneficial to our listeners and viewers? Let us into your space in terms of who is the real Elsie Pule. Over to you and welcome, Sisi. We are so blessed and we are so really, really humbled to have you today. But then let me give it over to you before I trip over myself, because I usually do. But let me hand over to you to just tell us about who is this remarkable lady that we are talking to today.
Okay, I'm Elsie Pule.
Yes.
Elsie is my slave name. I love it to bits because it also it's part of my history.
Yeah.
People who really know me, they would know that I'm Mamula Telo, my friends calls me Lati.
Uh-huh.
I'm a mother of 2 beautiful young men.
Yes.
I have been working for many, many years. I've always been a working mother. There's never been a time when I haven't worked.
Yes.
So a month ago, I just left a role after just 3 decades.
Sure, that's another thing that we need to unpack, 3 decades. But anyway, let me not steal your thunder. Yes.
So if you were going to ask me what I'm doing now, for the first time, it's so exciting to be an Elsie Pule without a title.
Aha.
So I'm taking a career break, definitely not retired.
Yes.
and I'm contemplating my next move. I have trained as a social worker, practiced as a social worker, ended up in HR, have been crazy about the advancement of others.
Yeah.
And even more crazy about furthering the aspirations of the constitution of this country.
Yeah.
Enabling other people to have a better life.
Yes.
And that has been my purpose.
You know what? Sometimes when I'm sitting with a guest like yourself, I'm even asking myself, you know what? You have done so many wonderful and remarkable things. What is the starting point? How do we even, how do we even start to unpack this discussion? But let's go back to your roots, right? I mean, earlier on, as we're preparing for this episode, you were letting me in where Winterfeld in Pretoria, where it is, right? So can you just tell us about, your background, where you grew up, and how was it growing up in a challenging environment like that, your earlier years, and what shaped you, in terms of, the field that you found yourself in when you started your career as a social worker. But I'm very, very much interested to actually understand, how was that environment for you, and how did you then break out of that environment, and to start to walk the journey that we have witnessed for over so many years?
Yeah, Pamela, my early influences comes from my mother, my late mother,
Yes.
who sadly passed away at 90 last December. May her soul rest in peace.
Yes.
She started working as a teenager as a domestic worker. She worked for one family for her entire career. I was born at my mother's place of work, so I'm number 4. So the ones who came before me, it would have meant that she would have been pregnant, worked through her pregnancy, and as soon as the child is born, you send them back to the Bantustans. So there must have been something about me because her employers decided to keep me, so I stayed in the big house. So for the first 6 years of my life, irrespective of my pigmentation, I thought I was white. I only spoke Afrikaans. So then,
Wow.
6 years came, and it became very clear during the apartheid era that there's no way that I was going to go to school in the suburbs. So I had to go back to Winterfeld, and she had to stay at work. So I had to join the rest of people, the rest of the family, and dance in the poverty space while she continued to work 7 days a week. Without sort of a meaningful income that could give us a decent life. So basically that was part of my initial influences. So you can imagine during apartheid, thinking you are white, coming back into the space, you probably had already learned the habits of you are better than others. And I remember some of my early memories is kids running after me, wanting me to open my mouth and say something, and people would be excited. You know where we come from. We even grew up thinking, if you're beautiful, you speak like a white person, or if you're beautiful, even sort of wedding songs, you are colored, whatever. Everything was linked to pigmentation, which was a lighter pigmentation, implying that it was better. So you can imagine the earlier years, at some point I must have felt that I was a queen, but reality kicked in very quickly. So let me tell you a little bit about Winterfeld.
Yes, please.
Winterfeld, where I grew up. In fact, I grew up in a place within Winterfeld called Kromgale, but I've stopped trying to say it because people don't know when Winterfeld is, let alone Kromgale. So, but then if you say Winterfeld, a few might know it. So you explain the proximity of Kromgale by Winterfeld. So many years ago, a lot of the richer or sort of moneyed black people bought land in this place called Winterfeld with aspirations to farm. But the strange thing about Winterfeld is that when it rained everywhere in South Africa, it never seemed to rain in Winterfeld. So all of those farming dreams sort of were dashed. And people then sort of turned out what they used to call 5 morgens, 10 morgens, and those were the sizes of the land they bought. They then turned them into like sort of informal settlements,
Yeah.
which would accommodate people, migrant laborers who
Yes.
were working in Pretoria, and they would stay there, or their families would stay there.
Yeah.
So it never, for the longest time, it never really became like a proper area to live. And it also fell under what we call Bupitazwana at some point. Some people my age would also know that there was a time in Bupitazwana when they were killing all the donkeys because they were competing with cattle for grazing. And I remember very vividly that stench of dead donkeys like everywhere. So in a nutshell, that's the Winterfeld I grew up in.
Life indeed is a journey, and I'm looking at you now, life is a journey, but I'm now particularly interested. So how did you then break out of that environment, right? So maybe just briefly paint a picture. It's like, okay, fine. How did you find yourself, being a social worker? How did that come about? And how did you then transition into HR in your earlier years? Because I think you've just mentioned that you've exited your role recently, and then now you're on a break and whatnot, which is probably it was not your first role, right? So take us back in time, right? In terms of how did you break out of Winterfeld, and you found yourself doing being a social worker, and then transition into HR, into your first role. What was that role? Where was that role? Because I think, I'm now getting stuck in this grassroots, but then, now the breaking out, which then starts to paint your journey of what was going to look like for the next 3 decades. Yeah.
So a lady like got married into the family of the landlord where my family stayed. And she was driving a car. She was black, and I looked at her and I thought, oh, okay, this is possible. And she was a social worker. She worked for child welfare in Mamelodi. And when I approached her, and then I discovered that it was possible. So I worked very hard. After matric, I went to Teflop University, where I studied my social work degree.
Yeah.
And I remember very vividly and fondly that when I graduated, the same lady is the one who drove me and my family to Polokwane for my graduation.
Yes.
So she'll forever be like dear to my heart.
Yeah.
And then I practiced. I worked for government, for the Transvaal Provincial Administration as a social worker.
Sure.
Had a wonderful experience being exposed to like sort of real groundbreaking challenges. And I think a lot of my interest in probably fairness and justice started there as a social worker. So I worked for the government, and then 3 years later I worked for an NGO, the National Council for the Aged. When the banks were migrating from the bank books to ATM cards. I was one of those social workers who was part of creating readiness for the elderly to move to the ATM card. So you can imagine.
So some of us don't
happening
even know how
at the
life
time.
was beyond ATMs.
Yes.
Before ATMs, I mean,
And we didn't call it change management at the time, but looking back now as an HR expert, I realized, we had done change management because we created readiness. We like sort of created awareness, and it was like big communication programs. The elderly didn't like it much. At the time, I remember my mother never migrated, so she got the card and she handed it over to me. And for the longest time, I was withdrawing. She went to the grave. She had never been in front of an ATM because she had a daughter who'd withdraw for her.
Yes.
So then when my son was 4 days old, I got retrenched by the National Council for the Aged, having worked for 3 years there. Got retrenched, and then I ended up, at the time I was studying psychology in Afrikaans, honors. And I worked very well. The head of department was wondering, who is this woman who can just come in here and do psychology? In Afrikaans, it's called Silkende.
Do you still speak Afrikaans?
I'm from Pretoria. I can say very Afrikaans. So,
oh my! Sure.
I was then hired by the University of Pretoria. To start the English classes for psychology in 1995. So people who ended up studying psychology in English at Tekis have me to thank for. And a year later, someone spotted me. They were looking for clever black women to come and work in corporate. And in 1995, that's how I ended up in Eskom. As an OD advisor. I worked for 15 years.
Yeah.
And at some point, I was excluded from a role and I got annoyed and I left. And I worked for the South African Revenue Service for 3 years as the Chief Human Resources Officer. And then because Eskom was in my blood at the time, when I was requested to come back 3 years later, I went back to Eskom in 2012. And I worked for the remainder of the time there. So in 2016, I was appointed to the Group Executive HR, having like sort of practice throughout the value chain of HR, throughout various aspects of HR. I became the head of HR in 2016. And I bowed out on the 31st of July, 2024. That's my CV. I told you the other day, I don't know how to write a CV. I think we'll use this recording now.
As a CV. Oh my goodness. You know what? Honestly, you've had such a rich life. You've had such a rich life as this Elsie. Because now I'm just thinking now in the context, you know, I didn't even know that you speak fluent Afrikaans. Who would have thought, you know, this dark-skinned woman who's got dreadlocks. It's like, you know. But anyway, it just goes to show, right, that, you know, stereotypes shouldn't be a thing, right, in the context of diversity and inclusion. You know, I think before I asked, you know, follow-up questions, maybe let's just unpack this topic, diversity and inclusion beyond the women agenda, right? What does this mean for you as Elsie Pule?
Yeah, so I need to like upfront also say that I'm not an apologist around the advancement of women. If you look at the history of our country, things started really changing when women took it upon themselves to do something about the apartheid situation. So I believe that for the past 30 years, we've been having a lot of interventions focusing on the empowerment of women. Yet we are not even close to achieving gender equity, let alone parity. Some narratives indicate that it's going to take us 137.5 years to get to gender equity, even much longer for gender parity if you're going to look at equal pay for work of equal value, and also recognition for unpaid labor that a lot of women focus on. So having been someone who has driven gender programs, and in fact, I had driven one successful one in Eskom for the past 12 years. I believe very strongly that whilst we have not achieved what we wanted to achieve yet, whilst we have not achieved the maturity in terms of gender empowerment, maybe we don't have like sort of enough time to do these things in silo. So I would like to propose that we need to look at like sort of the whole issue around diversity and inclusion more holistically. And use what we have learned with the women empowerment programs. And maybe, not maybe, I think women should be leading this journey. To look at how do we use the limited resources that we have to advance diversity and inclusion much more broadly. Looking at other things like your age, looking like your cultural background, looking at issues of disability and so on. Incorporating it such that, because I don't think if it's really going to take us more than 100 years to get to creating inclusive work environments, maybe we might have to start looking at it differently. One of the concerns I've had is that when you've been excluded for too long, when you get an opportunity of being included, sometimes you become very comfortable with the space and you exclude others. One of the concerns I have is the many programs or the multiple organizations, women in energy, women in nuclear, women in this, women in that. How about we just become women and we do this like sort of together? Because I suspect that if we do it together, we'll probably go like far quicker rather than all of these silo interventions around the advancement of women. So for me, diversity and inclusion beyond gender, that's what it means for me. I think it's about time. that we should not continue trying to do the same things, so that we're not stuck in this. It will take us 137 years to get to real parity.
Yeah.
And maybe our kids will see a different society.
You know, I'm just trying to now, I'm listening to you and I'm trying to almost like put myself in your shoes, which I wouldn't, because your shoes are like, you know, you've walked the entire lifetime. But I'm just feeling so privileged and honored to just have the opportunity to sit here with you and just pick your brain, you know, on certain things. Because then here I'm wondering, you know, you know, your career, you grew up in a different time when you initially started, right? And, you know, now this is 2024, and some of us who only started like working our first jobs, like let's say in 2003 or something, and, you know, we've experienced certain challenges, and we still continue to experience the challenges till this day, to your point that, you know, maybe the change that we are looking for, it will not happen in our lifetime, right? But then looking at, you know, some of the challenges, because you've worked predominantly in male-dominated industries, right? And, you know, so what were some of the challenges, maybe specifically one or two, you know, that stand out, that say, you know what, I can't believe I overcame that, you know, and I rose through the ranks, even through that. And because, and also in the industries that you've worked in, and, you know, there's been so much change and, you know, probably change of leadership, people come and go, and you know, so how did you navigate that environment? Because I'm sure it's like weeks and months don't look the same, years don't look the same. So how did you even stay sane and say, you know, let me maintain my composure and keep going? Just talk to us. I know that it's a loaded question, which maybe will need a long answer, but just walk us through your journey in that context.
Where do you start? But I think the biggest motivation for me had been my late mother.
Yeah.
She had never seen a door of a classroom.
Sure.
And every time it was like really tough. She was one of those mentors I had, and I didn't even like sort of, I would not have termed it a mentor.
Yes.
Going back. So when I remember a lot of the teachings and the lessons from her, it became very clear that no one owed me anything. So when I walked into an environment, and I was also one of the fortunate ones who had access to boardrooms earlier on in my career. It became very clear that no one owes me anything. So if I needed to be in the boardroom, I needed to make sure that it counts.
Yeah.
And I needed to bring myself and all of myself to the table.
Yeah.
That was the first one.
Yeah.
The second one that I also like sort of learned is that I have never been anybody who goes with the wind. So my purpose has always been clear. So close to like unshakable, but more of like if I'm focused on doing something and I believed it was good, because I've always based what I wanted to do in my careers, and I've been lucky that my careers had been in the social space where I could like sort of align to the Constitution.
Yeah.
If you're looking at the aspirations of the preamble of the Constitution of South Africa, I mean, there's no doubt that the intentions are good.
Yeah. Yeah.
The intentions are good, and it's about humility, and we've been banting Ubuntu, and for me, a lot of that grounded me. So when it was like really tough in the boardroom, it didn't matter. It didn't matter. So to take you back a little bit, so post-apartheid, South Africa opened up the work environment for Black people, people of color. And whilst the men of South Africa were excited about now we've got an opportunity, we're going to be like sort of accessing the market and so on, the whole issue of gender became very strong. And somehow you find as we talk as women year after year, we keep on saying we need to be empowered. By whom? Because everybody is battling with their own demons, including the African men. They also want to access the same a workplace and same opportunities. So when you go to the Constitution, it preaches fairness and equal opportunities for everybody.
Yes.
So for me, what kept me grounded all the time was that no one owed me anything. As long as I was in the room, I was not there by accident. I needed to make sure that when I'm there, I also enable others and going with the common pant of like lifting as we rise.
Yes.
That has been core to what I've always done.
Yes.
Because what I found is that as you lifted others, they joined your cohort.
Yes.
And you became much stronger.
Yes.
With other people
Yes.
around you.
Yes.
Making sure that we like sort of channel the course of transformation.
Yeah.
And making sure that we create diversity, inclusion, belonging in our organizations.
But I can only imagine, you know, Sis Elsie, that there would have been so much resistance, though. You know, didn't you experience that? I'm sure you did, obviously. I'm asking,
Yeah.
I'm going to answer myself. But how do you deal with resistance then? You know, because you say to me that, you know, even if there was tension in the boardroom, it didn't matter because you knew exactly. But then one would say, okay, but you need to get buy-in from this stakeholder and that stakeholder and this and this and this and that. So, you know, then overcoming resistance, how did you deal with that?
Yeah, I also remember like much earlier in my career, I had an opportunity of going to the States and I was trained by a guy called William Bridges. He was an HR expert. And he had written books around transitions.
Yes.
And one of the things I've learned and never forgotten from those teachings was that people are not resistant to you or what you're putting on the table. People are dealing with their own transactions. So until you can get people to a level where they understand what is in it for them, you are not going to achieve anything. And that's what on the surface we see as a resistance. So there's been resistance. There's still resistance this day. So for me, it has been the fact that I was fortunate to be equipped with the right skills, with the right experience to also understand that if you really wanted to go far with any intervention, you needed to make sure that you take the people along. And you also allay their concerns in terms of what they perceive to be losing in the process. There are times when I had gone like very forceful, maybe aggressive, especially if I believed that this was the right thing to do.
Yes, sure. You know, I wish that, you know, the higher power one day can give me the kind of courage, the kind of courage that you have, right? Because I'm just thinking that, you know, in the spaces that you've operated in, one, it was a public space, right? So public space, it comes with praise, but it comes with criticism as well, and some of the criticism may not be constructive, right? So, and also because you're in public service, there's media, there's newspapers, there's whoever writes whatever, either about you or the organization that you are representing. So can you talk to us then, how does, you know, one in that space navigate all of those things? Because maybe sometimes people will just write articles about Elsie Pule without getting the entire context. You know, can you maybe talk to us about maybe incidents where things were being said or written about you, and because of what you are doing, trying to change and trying to enforce, you know, transformation in certain aspects in your environment, and you face with resistance, and then people just interpret it however they want to interpret it, and boom, it's out there on some newspaper. Right, because I'm sure there have been those moments. So how did you deal with those, and what did that mean for you on a personal level as well as in your personal space in terms of your family and your kids and you know?
I think just working for ESCOM, it was enough to be like sort of enemy of the state, number one. In 2008, when we had the first load shedding, I was at ESCOM. And then I was part of the team that like sort of got to a point where for a bit we forgot about load shedding. When load shedding started again, I was still there. So you can imagine from a general like sort of negativity from society who were very uncomfortable with the fact that the state organ is not meeting its mandate. So that came with a lot of criticism. And I think from a career point of view, it sort of boxed me as well to be like sort of one of those. And we had seen some of the issues with Zondo Commission and so on. So I think when you say I'm an executive at ESCOM, they were looking at you and thinking, maybe are you corrupt, what have you stolen, and. So there was a lot of negativity that comes with that. So there had been instances where there were negative, like sort of media coverage associated with my name. A lot of it, and interestingly, thinking about all three of the examples I'm thinking of now, they are linked to the whole issue around people who are not very comfortable with transformation.
Yes.
So there were also issues of the lack of support of non-white people who were kicked out of ESCOM. There were media releases around that. There were media releases around gender, where some malicious individuals decided they were going to go on and like sort of create malice in terms of who Elsie is, who is this person around transformation. But because of the work that I've done, that did not stick. And I remember there was some like sort of inexperienced journalist from in the Cape when there was this whole issue around the narrative that there's a lack of skills at ESCOM. And it was not about the lack of skills. The narrative was trying to demonstrate that ESCOM needs to go back to where it was 100 years ago. And probably the solutions of ESCOM are like sort of maybe like your skill base is like sort of rested in your retired white employees and so on. And somehow I became like sort of the face of like, I was not enabling that. And my stance has been ESCOM needed everybody, all the races, and it needed everybody who's qualified. So when you look back now, I mean, the same people who were deemed to be incompetent and black, they've managed to turn the organization around. So for me, I've learned, and I remember coaching from one of our colleagues to then say, if something bad is said about you in the media today, don't worry. Tomorrow there'll be another story. It can't be personal. Someone is doing their job. So that also helped me to cope with all the negativity.
I don't want to use the word strong, right, to describe a woman like you, right? Because I would actually then just really describe you, Uguti. You are just really that one of those women that were just really God sent to uplift others, right? Because even when you are gone, your legacy continues, right? So you've been then the mastermind, right? I know that we're talking about diversity and inclusion beyond the women agenda, but just coming back to the women agenda, right? You've been the mastermind of some really, really impactful women programs, right? Can you then just maybe share with our viewers and our listeners just one or two of those programs, how they were crafted? How did you walk the journey with them, and what was the intention or the outcome of those one or two programs, and how did those programs expose those certain women into things that they wouldn't have been ordinarily exposed to, and how did then they contribute into how the organization you were with turned out to be in 2024?
There's been a lot. So I'm just gonna focus my energies on your question in terms of the empowerment of women. I spearheaded a program which was called the ESCOM Women Advancement Program. And 10 years later, the impact has been so great. I am under no illusion that we are there yet, or the women agenda in ESCOM is there yet. There's still a lot that needs to be done. So when it was said that we don't have enough women to appoint in critical roles, in 2016, I spearheaded a process where we allowed or enabled the organization to appoint 40 women at a go to a senior management level, moving the dial at the time from 29% representation in that level to 36%. So today they're sitting at 42%. So that's like your N-2 level of that organization. And then I remember when they said we don't have enough non-white licensed nuclear operators to operate and sustain the pipeline for one of the nuclear utilities. We went out and we recruited about 100 youngsters, 40 of them who were women, who were trained as licensed operators. Today, you will never hear that nuclear power plant complaining about the scarcity of nuclear operators because a very rich pipeline was built. So the third one was the whole issue around the fact that if you look at the work that we've done, if we look at where we come from as women, we ended up like spending all the time in the classroom. We would collect your B degrees, you collect your honors, yet you're still not enough. People would go back and get their MBAs and so on.
And still you're not enough.
Then you're still not enough. But then the environment actually encouraged that because you'd rather be out there rather than be here causing trouble. So we then co-designed a program with one of the SETAs and one of the institutions of higher learning. And we wanted to make sure that it was not like your typical MBA, but it was like a women leadership program that will empower women and basically focus on the areas of courage.
Yeah.
So that when women occupy those roles, they can know that they are there for a reason and they needed to show up. And then the change sticks so that you don't have like a cohort of women coming in and the environment being so hostile and then it exits. So you keep on like replenishing that. You want to make sure that when we spoke earlier around the whole issue around beyond gender, is that the ones who came before us, who we invested in, they don't quit. They continue being courageous as leaders, understanding that no one owes you anything, but knowing that you are there because you're supposed to be there to make sure that you can make an impact.
That you're not done a favor of some sort.
As we speak today, in my previous role at ESCOM, some of the work that you've done, so I sit back and I look, and I'm so proud to say 4 of the power station managers of the power stations that are doing like very well. They are females. And those are the females who like grew up within the organization, who were also exposed to this kind of interventions. So for me, I can proudly say that instead of just being there and waiting for someone to do something or complaining about the lack of transformation and so on, is to use yourself as a leader to make sure that you're gonna be the change that you want to see.
Sure, you've really made great strides. And, if I can just take just one page, one page out of your book of life, just to say, if I can do these 3 things, then maybe I'm on the road to go somewhere, right? But then now that you're talking about just beyond the women agenda, right? Because every time we talk about women and women agenda, someone always says it, because it's also a critical question. That then, so what about men? So where does that leave our boys? So a friend of mine is a mother of boys. She doesn't have girls. Is it like, you guys are like going about, so what happens to our boys then, right? So if we then, what are your views just on mentorship in general, right? Not just focusing on women, maybe focusing on other groups as well, especially making sure that our workplaces cater for inclusivity in its entirety, holistically, specifically also, for people that are from underrepresented groups in the workplace, not just focusing on girls and women, So, maybe just talk about, did you have maybe any mentorship programs that had a holistic view, and what can people do in that context to make sure that is implemented correctly and robustly in their workspaces?
So I have I've been at the risk of being typecast as somebody who advances women, but given my like sort of 37-year career journey, what I've always believed in has been inclusion. It's just that with the program of women, probably we had more gains than with the rest. But if you look at the work that I focused on, being a mother of boys, has always been about inclusion. But I don't apologize for advancing women. So until we get to a point where we understand that generally the men are okay. The men in the world are okay, it's also important not to exclude the younger men as we go through this transformation journey.
Yes.
As we do work, like for example, there had been interventions about bringing the girl child, whatever. I had been part of interventions where we like sort of focused on young people. So one of the programs we ran in the company, which was called Lift as You Rise, we looked at both young men and women, because you also don't want to do this to a point where the men or the younger boys would feel alienated in the process.
Yeah.
You also want to make sure that as you create opportunities for young girls, you also make sure that you take along their counterparts, their peers, in terms of awareness, because one day some of these men are going to be decision makers in organizations and so on. So you really need allies.
Yes.
But I don't think we should apologize for making a concerted effort of advancing women and girls moving forward.
Yes.
So for me, mentorship is key.
Yeah.
I don't think there's an amount of money or anything else that will like sort of enable our society to grow collectively such that we create inclusive workplaces and inclusive societies moving forward. We need to start tackling the whole issue around bias. You still see that, I mean, if you look at social media, you still see like women being typecast as those people who will be dancing naked, half naked, and like sort of for the appeasement of men and so on. You still see opportunities of our girls demanding to be given money by their boyfriends and stuff and so on. So until we tackle those basic biases and issues in terms of how we approach life, we will never get to a point where our kids, boys and girls, will see themselves as equals and also seeing themselves as having the same opportunities to be the best they can be. So I think as society, beyond the workplace, we really need to deal with the societal issue. We need to deal with the societal issue. There was a time when people were talking about, why do you give girls dolls to play with and the boys to give them the guns and the cars and so on. We just talk about it, but it's still there. It's still there. The girl-related things are like my iPad cover. They're pink. And then the stronger colors are like assigned to men and so on. And I think as mothers who are predominantly the parenting individuals in homes, I think we need to also make sure that we don't continue perpetuating patriarchy. Because our kids don't do what we tell them to do. They do what they see us doing. So for me, I think as a society, we need to work at that level. So, and as we mentor, we also need to make sure that we don't typecast our kids. And we also need to make sure that we eliminate bias as they grow up, hopefully. When we're no longer there, those who come behind us, they would understand that everybody has a human right to have access to all opportunities, irrespective of their gender, sex, age, and creed.
Okay, you know what? We are going to go on a bit more because there's just so much to unpack with you, Elsie. I always tell people that the reason why I started this podcast was to how do we create, obviously there are many other people that are doing, that have got podcast channels and other things and other platforms, right? So the main reason was, how do we expose our either young people, up and coming entrepreneurs, mainly from marginalized communities in terms of access to people that they wouldn't ordinarily have access to, So now I'm thinking of a younger Pamela sitting somewhere there in KZN and whatnot. Maybe they've data, they'll get to, really feel like they know who Sis Elsie Pule is because there's a platform like this. I'm sure you've been on other platforms as well, So, interviewing and talking to really influential people like yourselves, executive or influential entrepreneurs, to really just talk about your journey, a young girl from Winterfeld, and you've walked this journey and you've done amazing things, not only on the South African stage, but also on a global stage, so that we show our young people that, even though life has challenges and there are things that you need to overcome, you cannot say because of my background, I couldn't do 1, 2, 3, So you need to be intentional about your choices and how you show up and not giving up. and just really wanting to achieve something and do something for yourself, right? So how would you then, as our young people, some of them will be listening to this episode, right? In terms of, how can they go about making a difference in whichever spaces they find themselves in? So there's also obviously an issue of unemployment in our country that we are grappling with in recent times. So, but how do they show up? Someone might have just started work, or they're in a work environment where they're experiencing challenges of being excluded. So what would be your words, for those type of young people, either employed or unemployed, where they're also facing exclusion, whatever forms of exclusion in our society?
Yeah, I've had the pleasure of interacting with a lot of young people who are very focused and driven.
Yeah.
And that gives me hope, not to buy into like the narrative that our youth are apathetic and they're not interested in the future.
Yeah.
So I'm very hopeful.
Yeah.
That we've got great, and I've experienced them. Some of them I mentor, some of them are like sort of youngsters who had been brave enough to contact me and then ask for this support or that over the years.
Yeah.
So I would really encourage young people never to give up. They can't afford to give up.
Yeah.
They are the future.
Yeah.
So what it means then is that if they give up, we might as well like sort of shut down the country.
Yeah.
So they need to be as hungry as they can. I mean, you look at the unemployment rate of 33.5%. That's very sad. And the majority of that are youngsters. And of late, it's youngsters who also have a qualification, who are struggling to access the labor market. And then a lot of us who have found it easy in life, we keep on saying, no, you must go into entrepreneurship and so on. It's easier said than done. How do you do that without an infrastructure, without a support to do that as well? So I think young people should then make sure that, I mean, now compared to when I was much younger, they do have access. I know that there are those kids who don't have access to social media, but they do. And at certain premises, I mean, you drive through the rural areas, you'll see a lot of people congregated alongside a fence. Then you ask and they say, no, there's actually Wi-Fi in that school. They're there for Wi-Fi. So there is some form of access. So I would really like to encourage young people to use social media to their own benefit. There's a lot on that platform. Instead of just using it for like sort of dancing videos on TikTok. I mean, identify those seminars which are free to attend online or in person, empower yourself so that when there's like 1,000 other youngsters like you who don't have an opportunity, you can be able to differentiate yourself because you know the current affairs, you understand what's happening around. I mean, some of us, like by the time I went to university, I did not know there was a degree called BA Social Work Honors. So by the 4 years later, I had 2 degrees, but it was because I spoke to somebody. So now you don't only need to speak to somebody. There's a lot of podcasts, there's a lot of webinars, whatever. Just empower yourself as young people. Make sure that you choose also your friends wisely. Choose those kind of friends who are talking about progressive stuff. I know they use the word plug these days. Engage with those youngsters who plug you to opportunities or where these workshops are happening and so on. Volunteer. Volunteer, like sort of target organizations. You know that if you walk into an environment to say, I'm looking for work, they're going to say there's no work. Maybe if you walk in and say, I would like to volunteer, you will be able to showcase what you are made of. And who knows? You might end up being employed. So I would really encourage young people to be much more hungry, be focused, and be selfish about your development. And if you can, I mean, nothing stops you from approaching somebody that you respect to say, may you please mentor me.
Don't be afraid of rejection. What's the worst that can happen?
Absolutely.
It's a no. And then you move on to another door.
Absolutely.
No, thank you so much. Thank you so much, Elsie. Now, let me come back to you, So the question that I wanted to ask is, what does it take, for someone like you who has exited this very public space? And when you exit, so obviously it sparks curiosity, right? So, and which is the reason why we are even here in the first place, because I thought, What's going on? Let me go and see if I can, talk to Elsie and have this conversation with her about her life and experiences, because I thought, would be, maybe robbing our audience, which are the young people and entrepreneurs and young professionals, to actually get, the real woman, the brains behind all of this wonderful work that has been done. But but also it sparks, people make all sorts of speculations, and they like, Elsie, I'm sure some of them reach out to you on a personal level. So I can then only imagine that then maybe the past few weeks or past month has been maybe a roller coaster in your head. So how do you stay sane?
Yeah, I've been very fortunate.
Yeah.
The first month of unemployment was Women's Month.
Aha.
And people who've known me, I come alive during that month.
Yes.
And I've had the pleasure of engaging on many programs
Yeah.
aligned to that. So prior to my exit, I landed like one of the groundbreaking programs, as I indicated, where we took about more than 100 women on a global immersion to the US and Germany. And then during that process, I also like sort of came across other
Say that again. You took how many women to
more
work?
than 100.
You took more
So
than 100
about
women
35 executives and about 77
to work.
middle management. So they had gone through a 12-month women leadership program that I mentioned earlier.
Yeah.
And then the end of the program, they had
Yes.
to go for a global immersion. So the senior women, we took them to Duke University in the States to do a further leadership development program, and then also to visit other utilities and renewable organizations. And then we took the 77 women to Germany, where they got exposed to like sort of, Germany is like similar to South Africa. It had disinvested from fossil power into renewables, and they are far into that process. So the women got exposed to like sort of what does it mean when you're talking about the just energy transition, and what do you mean by like sort of renewable? Because if you are a South African and having come out of load shedding, when they're talking about power, your orientation is coal. We've got a lot of coal in South Africa, so we'll probably still be generating from coal, but we also need to start migrating to like an emissions-free kind of environment. So the women got exposed to that. And one of the highlights was that I had the pleasure of taking the 77 women to lunch with a real prince in a real castle as part of the cultural immersion. So for me, having been able to be in that space, that's why I believe that it's possible. And it's possible for a black child.
No, indeed. Look at you. It is possible. Look at me. I'm talking to you, so it's possible. No, man, thank you so much. So with all of that, right? And because, I'm just thinking, obviously, you occupied an HR space, and the environment where you operated is a massive national environment, right? And one would, need to say, because HR traditionally, HR is just a support function and whatnot. But in your environment, I'm sure how did you become so intentional that, how does an HR professional actually immerse themselves into the business environment so that you are not even just seen as a support function, but you become one of the key decision makers in that boardroom table as far as key business decisions are made, right? So how did you transition into that? Obviously, with your experience and years and whatnot, but paint a picture for us. Also answering the question, why is it important for HR people actually to be seen as a real strategic business partner? Because then to understand an environment like that, one is a massive environment, and then you are throwing terms like nuclear, this and this and that. So, and then how do you then get to actually speak that language?
Yeah. So I don't believe that HR is a support function. Not if you've walked in my altars or the shoes of all of those HR leaders out there.
Yeah.
I think it's more of an enabling function.
Yeah.
But it's also very important for HR professionals to understand that when you come into an environment, that environment is not an HR environment. So in order for you to enable, you also need to make sure that you immerse yourself and you get to have an appreciation of the business.
Yes.
You don't become an engineer. You remain an HR person,
Yeah.
but you have an appreciation of what the business is about, so that whatever you put in the table advances the objectives of that organization.
Yeah.
And I've done that all the time. I mean, earlier on in my career, I made sure that I went into what they called a unit appreciation course. I worked like sort of a night shift with employees, just to have an appreciation that when you come and you like implement interventions, you understand who is your customer base, who is the end user of the service you implementing. And I also got to understand also that a lot of people say HR just like sort of spends money, they don't make money.
Yes.
But it's also important that when you implement interventions, I've always, with the big interventions I've had, I've always started with a business case. You need to be able to demonstrate what is the value proposition of what you're putting on the table. And what are the implications in terms of rents and cents. If you are able to cost analyze and look at the impact of your intervention, also try to make sure that you empower yourselves, that you are able to combine a business case so that you can go into the boardrooms and sell a proposition. So when you make a narrative to say, I believe if I do X, it's going to contribute to business performance, there should be a correlation in terms of what do you mean. You can't always work from here. You also have to be able to have a data-rich kind of environment in HR. And for people who've worked with me, they'll also know that much as I'm a social worker, and I always tell people I'm the only social worker in the room, so I'm the only one who should do emotions. The rest of us have to do facts. Because without facts, we are not going to get a buy-in. So I've always done that. And I have exposed myself to a lot of training, which was not just HR. I empowered myself on HR tools. In my toolbox, I had HR tools, but I also had business tools. One of my interventions and my master's dissertation was based on what we call occurrence management, which was looking at what caused plant incidents from a behavioral perspective. And my research found that more than 77% of the reasons were related to latent organizational weaknesses. So as leaders, every time when something goes wrong, you want to punish someone or send someone to school. But most of the time, the reasons are because of the poor decisions that leadership takes. And I was able to integrate that into the leadership development initiatives and so on. So when you work at that level, you end up respecting yourself, and then you start getting respect from others. And the teams that you lead get very excited, because people go to school and they come work in your environment, and they're excited about this. In the last 5 years, I've managed to attract engineers who moved into HR. And I have a sneaky suspicion that that was triggered by the way I led HR as well. So when you talk to them now, they probably tell you they wouldn't want to go back to engineering because they've discovered that this is not a support function. This is an interesting and a big enabler of business processes.
Sure. Honestly, you are just really a rich woman, Elsie. I mean, I'm just, what you've shared with us is just probably a tip of the iceberg, So let me go back to that story that you told us about the women that you took them to Germany and you took them to the prince. What was that about? Can you just paint us? Because I know that when we had our earlier discussions, but I think our viewers need to get the benefit of the story, you know. So let's add humor to it, but also it's not just humor. This was a real lived experience of those women and the prince. So how did that come about? What actually happened?
So I don't believe in it can't be done. So a few months before we undertook the trip to Germany, I found myself at an event, and they were hosting the Prince of Prussia. And I had an opportunity of engaging with him, and being the Elsie Pule who's crazy, I said to him, I'm bringing women to Germany. It would be nice if you can host us. And the Prince George said, in fact, I can do better. I can cook lunch for them or dinner. And then I said, they're 77. And he said, yes, I've committed. So with my co-organizers at the university and CETA,
Sure.
I then said to them, so when we do the immersions,
Yeah.
part of the immersion becomes the cultural immersion. So you also don't want to take people just to see business processes.
Yes.
You also want to for them to have an appreciation, because you're building global leaders
Yes.
of how people live and so on. So I said, actually, I have got a good idea of what the cultural immersion would be.
Yes.
And a lot of people, and I think if you can talk to some of them, they'll probably tell you that they thought, oh, she's at it again. That's crazy. That's not happening. Long story short, on the second day of a global immersion in Germany, we went to Stuttgart, to an actual castle. And the women had lunch there. So that was a powerful experience. I don't think they'll ever forget that.
No, they won't, right? And those are the things that whenever your name is mentioned, right? Because I'm sure these are type of stories that sit within their households as well, right?
Pamela, we made the news in Germany. We made the news, one of the most read newspapers in Germany. So it spoke about, and obviously because of the language barriers and so on, they said like sort of 75 women from far away came to visit the prince. Yeah, for me that
sounds like something
was a highlight
from a movie, right?
I'm telling you, that was a highlight.
Women from far away.
Who said HR is boring?
Oh no, honestly, you've made it so interesting and so inspiring for us, and we're just really, really blessed to actually then just have the opportunity. And just thank you for your, just for being humble as well, right? Because when I reached out to you, I didn't even think that you would agree. But I think, I've taken a leaf from your book, because I think I was like, what's the worst that can happen? She can just say no, and then it's fine. I move on with my life. But then I said, okay, what if she says yes? And then she's like, oh, she said yes. Okay, now what? What do I do?
but thank you for having me.
Thank you so much. Really, thank you so much. But then this one question. So now you've been at home for a couple of weeks, and you're thinking, okay, so you're resting. But, a woman like you doesn't like really rest because you're not retired. So you're resting and contemplating, okay, what's my next move? So I'm not saying that reveal to us what's your next move. But then as you're sitting there at home and whatever you're doing, because obviously there are other people that are talking to you, So like personality like you cannot just sit and no one talk to you. So now how do you envision the future?
So, if I had something, I was going to tell you. So I don't have anything, but what I know is that I'm going to do something, and that something is going to be great.
Yes.
So one of the last things, just to...
Can I be part of it, whatever it is?
If I can break... So whilst I was serving notice, I had the pleasure of being appointed as the president of the International Atomic Energy Association Knowledge Management HRD Conference in Vienna in July.
Okay, I know you've said that slowly. You just need to be slow. For viewers and our listeners, I've got my guy here in studio as well, who's behind the scenes, behind the camera. So, Sifanele, please catch this one, all right? And make sure that you write it on the captions when you release the episode. Okay, please say it.
So I was appointed as the president of the International Atomic Energy Association HRD Knowledge Management Conference that took place from the 1st to the 5th of July 2024. So my role meant that I was president of conference, so I got to, and it's a global a platform. I got to be the one opening the conference. So when they said conference is opening, I got to be that person. And I got to close the conference. And in between, I sort of facilitated a few panels and then also presented some of the papers in line with my competence. The reason why I'm mentioning that is that every time I've traveled anywhere, I always make sure that I travel with a protege or a mentee. And up to that point, whilst we're walking the corridors of the agency in Vienna,
Yeah.
it had not like sort of clicked what was happening.
Yes.
And we'd be walking the passages and with this protege of mine, and then someone would pass and say, Madame President, and I would pass. And then she would say to me, ma'am, they're talking about you. And they're talking about you. But for me, I was so humbled with the appointment. I mean, how would somebody even know how to nominate me for that kind of initiative, which is predominantly like sort of nuclear oriented? For me to like sort of run a conference that big, which was not only in person and was also virtual, and to engage with people who've been experts in the space of nuclear and so on. So for me, that recognition was like really linked to what they say in Shangan, mintiro ya bulabula. So if you do good and you don't expect like sort of immediate like recognition and so on, your work cannot be hidden.
Yep.
So now as I'm contemplating my next move, I'm opening my mind and I'm opening my heart to what the universe has to offer. And I think with the competence base that I've built over the years, I still have a lot to contribute. As I said when you started, I'm definitely not retiring. I'll retire in the grave.
You are so young. Retire for what is retirement? What does that even mean? Because I think maybe back then retirement is like, okay, I'm done. Then I'll just sit at home, do nothing. Can you really afford to do that these days? You know. So no, you can't. But also, I mean, I think if you just retire, you will just be robbing some of us and the younger generation of this remarkable woman that you are and this persona. Because I think South Africa is blessed. Not I think I know. We are blessed, honestly, to have you. It's just that, sometimes we don't reach out to people like yourselves enough and actually get to understand the person that sits behind the name and who they really are and what they've done and some of the selfless actions that you have taken. And because I'm sure you have also absorbed a lot of pain as well, right? Because walking this journey for so many years, it cannot have just been easy walking the park and whatnot. So it has obviously also shaped your resilience and maybe the certain level of stubbornness to say, come hell or high water, it shall be done because I believe that it is right. Right.
Absolutely.
So I think then as we prepare to close, with the diversity and inclusion beyond the women agenda. So now we are in September, Heritage Month, our identities, who we are, what is that one thing that, no matter what, that you think that people need to know about Elsie Pule that defines that when they see the name or hear the name or come across you, that one thing that sets Elsie Pule apart? Because there is that one thing. What is that one thing?
Humility.
Yeah. And what does that mean for you in your space? If you have to unpack it for us, because you have humility, but you've done all of these amazing things. So how does humility come in then?
So for me, what it means is that we should never take the opportunities that we're given or we access for granted. So when you get that opportunity, it does not necessarily mean that you are great as an individual. Someone might be betting on you. Someone might be a voice somewhere where you are not. And people may be taking a chance on you.
Yeah.
So when you get that opportunity, go out there and make sure that you do good. And I'll go back to my cliche of the constitution of this country. It's about fairness and making sure that everybody gets an opportunity to be the best they can be. They get an opportunity to resources and they are enabled to achieve their dreams. So I'm crazy about that. So you can give me anything, you can throw me anywhere, as long as I can identify that I'll be able to be humble and enable others and help others. I think I'll be the happiest.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much. But don't you feel that a part of you has been taken away though? Because I'm just thinking that if you've been in an environment for such a long time, what is that one thing that you miss?
So, because I had been a leader and I had platforms to talk to staff and so on, I
Yeah.
always said to people, when you are throwing lemons, you know how we speak as a child.
Yes.
When you are throwing lemons, make
Yes.
lemonade.
Yes.
When the carpet keeps shifting, dance on it and so on.
Yes.
So for the first time, I had to practice what I say. I've been having a very interesting engagements, being invited to platforms and the forms that people invite you on. For the first time, I discovered that if you don't work for anybody or you don't have a title, it looks like they're not targeting you. Because he said, what sector are you in? What organization? What's your title? And all of a sudden, I was doing not applicable, not applicable. But with it, much as initially I was very anxious about it, but it brings so much freedom. Freedom to the fact that I'm just me, and I've never been reckless with my words. But
Yeah.
now it's like, this is Elsie Pule without the Elsie Pule of ESCOM. So hopefully people will engage me without sort of ask me about vacancies or tenders or whatever. So they'll engage me as an individual. So it gives
Yes.
me a big sense of relief.
Yeah.
I feel much lighter. The idea that I don't know what I'm going to do next, but I know it's going to be great, excites me. So I remember one politician once on X indicated to say, hey, guys, don't be married to these titles. When they're taken from you, you start doing things by yourself. And I read the thread of what he was talking about to say, you're going to be checking in at a hotel yourself. You're going to be booking your flights. You're going to be managing your diary. So now I remember my eldest son was saying, Mama, I think you need a PA for your social life. And I said to him, don't worry, very soon the Elsie of ESCOM will fall off and I'll be Elsie. So my life won't be that crazy anymore. So the people who will be engaging me will be real, authentic, and genuine people who engage me as an individual, as a person.
Like how we are doing now, right? And I'm just glad that I'm doing it. I'm glad that I'm doing it with you. I think, Sifanele, how long have we been going on for now? Honestly. Huh? An hour, 20 minutes.
Wow.
Oh my God.
Wow.
And I still feel like going on. So as soon as we are talking, I'll say, now all my questions are gone. And I'm thinking, okay, no, but now I don't want to start,
Yeah.
putting new questions. But thank you so much for actually, being vulnerable, number one, but also opening up your space and your life and your experiences, and having held such a high profile public persona and a public space, where you have impacted in a positive way so many people's lives, especially women's lives, that I'm sure they will have stories to tell for decades into their old age as well, about how there was once a remarkable Elsie that did 1, 2, 3 for them. So now that I have a relationship with you, I am not letting you go. So, and I don't take no for an answer. So if you find me nagging, you just say, Pam, don't be a nag. I'll talk to you next week or something like that. But I just want to really say we appreciate you. We love you. I think you're just really one of those women in the HR spaces, because I know you through HR communities and HR spaces, other than the fact that you have a public persona. You were just one of those women that I admired from a distance. And I just, maybe we've mingled here and met here and there in some of the HR communities, but never really had a discussion to sit down one-on-one and get to know who you are. So just for me, this is a really big defining moment, because listening to your journey and some of the remarkable things that you have done, it continues to reinforce in my mind, and also for our young people and our viewers and our listeners, that, you can achieve anything, if you put your mind into it and you don't give up and you keep going. Even when challenges do come, right? You must just have the stubbornness. You must be stubborn about your goals and have the courage as well. So I just really want to say thank you so much for coming through, and we have been really, really blessed.
Thank you so much.
And thank you for allowing me into your life and into your space. And please do allow me to maintain the relationship going forward. So I think last words, parting words, to our audience and to our viewers and our listeners, just a few words of inspiration. Here's your lens over there. From Elsie Pule, that when they listen to this episode and then in closing they'll say these were Elsie Pule's last words on that episode 17 of the Diversity Roundtable in September 2024. What are those words?
Yeah, so when you are given an opportunity and you come into the rooms that you probably don't think you are destined for, make sure that you show up and you do the best you can. I don't know much about soccer, and my sons are going to laugh at me. So there's only one guy I know in soccer, and it was because of a speech that he made, Lionel Messi. They asked him, and they were like giving statistics that you have scored so many goals and you have done this and you have done that. After all this is said and done, what do you want to be remembered for? And the young man said, I want to be remembered for having been kind. And that stayed with me. So remember, in anything that you do, just be kind. Thank you.
Thank you, Elsie. Thank you for gracing us with your presence. Our listeners, viewers, thank you for coming in. Thank you for tuning in. You have been listening to episode 17 with the topic Diversity and Inclusion Beyond the Women Agenda, with the inspirational, very humble Elsie Pule. I am your host, checking out Pamela Xaba. We will talk again in the next episode. Thank you so much.
Franklin Covey South Africa actually does is really around leadership development.
Okay.
And developing leaders at all levels, instilling greatness, instilling habits of effectiveness in people, which I thought, it's funny how the universe works. To your point, that when you get into certain spaces, you then start attracting like-minded people. You start attracting those things that you really needed. Because what I really needed at that time to boost my confidence and to boost my self-esteem, again, because as you can understand, coming out of a corporate environment, then you're on your own. Sometimes your self-esteem can take a knock, right? And I was like, oh, okay, actually there's someone who believes that, someone who holds such a big brand, they believe that I'm doing great work. But what also stood out for me was, I really needed to polish up my leadership, some of my leadership traits as well, in terms of letting go of some of self-limiting habits, self-limiting thoughts, self-limiting behaviors. How do I show up in my full self? And the more I got into the Franklin Covey content, it's, when you get those aha moments, and you get that thing that says, you know what, I'm in the right space. And I'm just really particularly excited that, more and more people then will get to, experience the great work that Franklin Covey does, because it really, one is a confidence booster. Yes, that's what it has done for me, because people are like, oh, actually you associated with this big brand. Yeah, then immediately that lifts your self-esteem, that lifts your confidence, but also knowing that I can help other people, right, who may be